The inheritance meeting. They say blood is thicker than water, but I have learned sometimes blood stains deeper than any wound a stranger could ever give you. I still remember the words my late husband once whispered as we sat on the porch during one of his weaker evenings. "Eleanor, when I'm gone, promise me you won't let them take away what you deserve. You've given too much already." That promise clung to me like a shadow, and it became the reason I found myself driving through the gray drizzle that morning, heart pounding, heading toward the meeting that would determine the future of everything we had built together. But fate has a way of sending signs. On my way there, I saw a man hunched against the rain outside the courthouse steps, clothes tattered, hair tangled, holding nothing but a soaked piece of cardboard. I slowed my pace, something about his eyes catching mine. For a second, I wondered, why does his stare feel almost knowing? I pressed on, clutching my purse tighter, my mind consumed with what awaited upstairs. Before I take you deeper into this story, before the betrayals unfold and the tables turn, let me ask, if you were in my shoes, walking into a room filled with people who had already decided your worth, would you stay silent, or would you find the courage to fight back? And one more thing. Before we dive into today's drama, don't forget to subscribe to Quiet Revenge Tales and ring the bell. Here you'll always find stories of sacrifice, betrayal, and the unexpected twists that bring justice at last. Where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. Perhaps the next tale may echo something you've lived yourself. The Widow in the Shadows. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 63 years old, a widow of 2 years, and for most of my life I was the quiet backbone of a family that never once acknowledged my spine was holding it all together. I married Richard Whitmore when I was barely out of college. He was charming, the kind of man who could light up a room with his smile and silence it with his temper. But he was also deeply loyal to his family, especially his mother and siblings. From the moment I married him, I knew I was stepping into not just a marriage, but a dynasty. The Whitmores had money, old money, land passed down for generations, a sprawling estate in the countryside, and a network of businesses tied to the Whitmore name. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of a school teacher and a nurse. I brought love, patience, and years of unpaid labor at home. They brought disdain. "Eleanor is sweet," I overheard my sister-in-law once say, "but she'll never be one of us." I smiled politely, as I always did. I cooked at the gatherings, ironed Richard's shirts, and cared for his aging parents when no one else would. When Richard grew ill, I was the one who sat through endless nights at his bedside, holding his hand through pain, while his siblings made excuses about work and travel. And yet, as I walked into that inheritance meeting, I already knew what they would try to do. They had been circling like vultures long before the body was cold. The meeting. The room smelled of leather and stale perfume. A long mahogany table dominated the space, its surface gleaming under the chandelier. Gathered around it were Richard's family, his mother, Estelle, sharp-eyed and immaculately dressed, his brother, Gregory, smug with his gold watch flashing, and his sister, Marianne, lips pursed so tightly it seemed smiling had been outlawed. I sat at the far end, my palms damp against the envelope I carried. "Well, Eleanor," Estelle began, her voice smooth as ice, "thank you for joining us. We thought it only proper to invite you, of course, though I'm sure you understand. These matters are best handled by blood." Her words sliced straight through me. Gregory leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Yes, it's family business after all. And while we all appreciate what you did for Richard, marriage doesn't rewrite lineage." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "I was his wife for 37 years. I think that counts for something. Counts for companionship," Marianne sneered. "But inheritance? That's another story." The lawyer shuffled his papers, trying to maintain order, but the air was already thick with dismissal, with the unspoken belief that I was just an accessory, a placeholder. And then, just as the conversation sharpened into accusations, the door creaked open. All eyes turned. There he was, the same ragged man I had passed outside, stepping into the lavish room as though he belonged there. Murmurs rippled around the table. His shoes were caked in mud, his coat frayed at the sleeves. Estelle gasped, clutching her pearls. "What on earth is he doing here?" she hissed. The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. "Actually, he's here at Richard's request." The room froze. At that moment, I felt a shiver down my spine. The very man they dismissed as worthless was about to shatter the facade of control that Estelle and her children clung to, but I didn't know how. Not yet. In seeds of betrayal. Before that revelation, though, the barbs continued. Estelle launched into a tirade about how I had bled the family dry with Richard's medical bills, though it had been my savings, my time, my body broken by caregiving. Gregory leaned in, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll be out of that house by the end of the month." We've already made arrangements. The humiliation burned. Have you ever sat in a room where every glance tells you that you are invisible, unworthy, disposable? If you have, then you know that sting. And if you haven't, I pray you never do. But remember this. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. And they had underestimated me. Mini cliffhanger. As the lawyer prepared to read Richard's final letter, the ragged man stepped closer, his eyes locking with mine for a heartbeat longer than seemed accidental. Something in that gaze told me he carried a secret far heavier than the coat on his shoulders. And in that instant, I realized the balance of power was about to shift. If you were Eleanor, sitting there with every eye against you and a stranger suddenly stepping into the fray, would you see him as a threat or as an ally? The answer would change everything. The family turns. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as though the papers in front of him were heavier than simple sheets of parchment. Yet before he could begin, Estelle raised her hand, cutting through the silence like a blade. "There's no need for theatrics," she said, her voice crisp. "We already know Richard's intentions. The estate belongs to his bloodline, not some outsider who happened to marry him." Her eyes flicked toward me, cold and unwavering. I felt my breath hitch, but I forced myself to stay still. You see, that's how they won, by provoking, by making me defend my worth again and again until I began to believe their lies. Gregory leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking under his bulk. "Eleanor, let's not pretend here. You're living in a house that was built long before you arrived. You don't contribute to the businesses. You don't carry the Whitmore name by blood. Honestly, it's time you step aside, step aside." Such an easy phrase. As if 37 years of devotion, caregiving, and sacrifice could be erased with 3 little words. Marianne's lips curled. "Richard probably meant to leave you something modest, I'm sure, a token for companionship. But the real assets, they belong to us." The widow's silence. I stared down at my hands, fingers intertwined, knuckles pale from pressure. In my silence, they saw weakness, but in truth, silence was the only shield I had left. Do you know what it feels like to be talked over in your own life? To watch others write your story while you sit as a spectator? If you've ever been silenced, you'll understand the fire building in my chest. The ragged man, still standing near the door, remained quiet, his presence an odd discomfort to the others. Every so often his eyes flicked toward me, a quiet assurance that unsettled Estelle enough to glance at him with disdain. "Can we remove him?" Marianne demanded. "This is a private matter." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. I'm afraid he has every right to be here. Richard left explicit instructions. That statement alone was enough to sour the room further. Estelle's knuckles tightened around her pearl necklace. Gregory muttered under his breath, and Marianne looked as if she'd swallowed something bitter. And then the insults began in earnest. Cutting words. "You drained him," Estelle said sharply, her words slicing through the air. "You sat by his bedside, yes, but don't mistake martyrdom for contribution. You made him weak, Eleanor. He could have fought harder if you hadn't filled his days with pity." I flinched as if struck. Gregory chimed in with a scoff. "The truth hurts. You clung to him like a leech. And now, you want to cling to the estate? Pathetic." Marianne's laughter was cruel and short. "Imagine thinking caregiving counts as legacy. Eleanor, you were a nursemaid at best, not a partner." Their words weren't just cruel. They were calculated. They wanted me small. They wanted me erased before the ink was even dry on Richard's memory. And yet, as each insult landed, I noticed the ragged man's jaw tighten. He wasn't just a passive observer. No, he was waiting for his moment. The threats. Gregory pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table toward me. "We've already drafted the paperwork. Once the estate is finalized, you'll vacate the main house. We'll allow you a modest stipend, enough to live somewhere suitable." "Suitable?" I echoed softly. "Yes," Marianne said, her tone dripping disdain. "An apartment, perhaps. Something within your means. Surely you don't expect to remain in a place like Whitmore Manor. That house represents our family history. And frankly, Eleanor, you don't belong in it anymore." Her words echoed in the chamber, each syllable a hammer striking the last nail into the coffin they'd built for me. For a brief moment, I wanted to scream, to pound the table, to demand recognition for every sacrifice I had made. But then I remembered Richard's voice on the porch. "Don't let them take what you deserve." And so I stayed quiet. The ally no one expected. The ragged man finally spoke, his voice gravelly but firm. "Funny thing about history," he said, stepping forward. "It doesn't always belong to those who shout the loudest. Sometimes it belongs to those who kept it alive quietly." Every head turned. Estelle's eyes blazed. "Who are you to speak in this room?" He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone Richard trusted more than you realize." The lawyer cleared his throat again, nervous. "Perhaps we should proceed with the documents." But Estelle slammed her palm on the table. "No, this is an outrage. Eleanor has no claim, and whoever this vagabond is, he has no right to interfere. This is our legacy." Her words rang with finality, but even she must have sensed the ground shifting beneath her, because for the first time, there was doubt in her eyes. The widow's reflection. As they continued to argue, I sat back, my mind spiraling. Memories flashed. The nights spent bathing Richard when he was too weak to rise. The hours spent cooking for his siblings who never thanked me. The years of working part-time to cover bills while Gregory and Marianne flaunted vacations. Sacrifice. Betrayal. It was all woven into the tapestry of my life. And yet, something in me was shifting. Maybe it was the presence of that strange man. Maybe it was Richard's memory urging me on. Or maybe it was simply the breaking point, the moment when silence no longer felt like survival, but surrender. I lifted my eyes and spoke. "You talk about legacy as if it belongs to you by default. But legacy is more than bloodlines. Legacy is love. Legacy is sacrifice. And I've given more than any of you ever have." The room fell silent, if only for a moment. Gregory laughed bitterly. "Lovely speech, Eleanor. But words don't change deeds. And the deeds, They're ours. He thought he had the last word, but he didn't know what was coming. To mini cliffhanger. Because in the envelope pressed against my palm was something I hadn't yet revealed, something Richard had given me weeks before his passing. And across the room, the ragged man reached into his own coat pocket, his fingers brushing against folded papers that looked eerily similar. 2 secrets, waiting to collide. If you were in my place, would you reveal yours now, or wait until the very moment they least expected it? Sometimes justice demands patience, and my patience was just about to run out. The breaking point. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the courthouse windows like a relentless heartbeat. Inside, the air was suffocating. My in-laws continued to speak of me as if I were an obstacle to be removed, not a wife who had carried Richard's burdens, not a woman who had given decades of her life to the Whitmore name. Every insult was a dagger, but strangely, every dagger sharpened something inside me. Estelle leaned forward, her manicured fingers clutching a crystal glass of water. Eleanor, this charade has gone on long enough. Richard's gone, and with him, your place in this family. You're not blood. You never were. When this is over, you'll be nothing but a guest overstaying her welcome. I inhaled slowly, tasting the bitterness in the air. For a moment, I caught my reflection in the polished wood of the table. Tired eyes, lined face, but a fire still glowing. They hadn't extinguished me yet. If you've ever sat in a room where people try to erase your existence while you're still breathing, then you know the rage that simmers just beneath the skin. That was me, in that moment. A widow's resolve. I remembered nights when Richard's breathing had faltered, when I'd counted the seconds between his gasps, praying each one wouldn't be the last. His siblings hadn't been there. Estelle hadn't left her estate in the city. It was me. Always me. And still, they dared to call me useless. Gregory smirked across the table, his voice low, mocking. "You'll thank us one day, Eleanor. A smaller place, no responsibilities. At your age, what else do you need? What else did I need? Perhaps only dignity, perhaps only justice. And justice was closer than they realized." Team the Stranger speaks. The ragged man stepped forward again, his shoes scuffing against the marble floor. "Funny," he said, his tone quiet but sharp. "How easy it is to dismiss the one person who gave everything." Estelle turned on him, fury flashing in her eyes. "You don't belong here." "This is a family matter, is it?" he asked calmly. "Because from where I stand, family is supposed to mean loyalty, care, respect. I haven't seen much of that today." The siblings erupted in protest, their voices overlapping, demanding his removal. But he didn't flinch. His presence unsettled them. His calmness in the face of their venom carried more weight than their shouting. And then his eyes met mine again. It wasn't just sympathy. It was knowledge. He knew something. The letter. Finally, I slid the envelope across the table, my hand trembling not from fear but from the weight of what it contained. "What's this?" Gregory sneered. I met his eyes, steady. "Richard gave it to me." Weeks before he died, Estelle's face blanched. "Impossible. He was too weak." "He was weak," I interrupted softly, "but not powerless. He wanted his truth to be heard." The lawyer hesitated, glancing between us. Slowly, he picked up the envelope, opening it with careful fingers. The sound of tearing paper cut through the chaos like thunder. Inside was Richard's handwritten letter, sealed with his signature. The lawyer's eyes scanned the page, widening with every line. "This changes things," he murmured. "What do you mean?" Marianne snapped. But he didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read. Richard's voice. To my beloved Eleanor, the lawyer read, his voice steady, and to those gathered here today, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I leave behind not just an estate, but the truth of who stood by me when it mattered most. Eleanor, you were my anchor, my nurse, my friend, my partner. You carried more than I ever deserved to ask of you, and while others chose absence, you chose presence. For that, everything I leave behind is yours. Not because of law, not because of duty, but because of love. To my family, blood may tie us, but blood alone does not earn inheritance. Consider this not punishment, but a lesson. Love, loyalty, and sacrifice are the true currency of legacy. The words hung heavy in the room, dripping like molten iron. Reactions. Estelle's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Gregory's smug grin vanished, replaced by a red flush creeping up his neck. Marianne's jaw quivered as though her tongue had been tied. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Gregory exploded. Forgery! This has to be a trick. Eleanor, you think you can fabricate something like this and steal what's ours? His voice was venom, but beneath it was fear. The ragged man stepped closer, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. It's no trick. He laid it on the table beside Richard's letter. Richard hired me months before he passed. I may not look the part today, but I am an attorney. He asked me to safeguard his wishes, knowing there might be resistance. The room erupted in chaos. The turning tide. Estelle pounded her fist against the table. This is absurd. We won't accept it. We'll fight it in court. The lawyer, still holding Richard's letter, shook his head. You can try, but the handwriting, the signature, the witness notarization, it's all here. This document is airtight. Richard's assets are Eleanor's, effective immediately. I sat frozen, my heart racing. For the first time, I saw the power shift, subtle but undeniable. The fortress they had built was crumbling brick by brick, but victory wasn't mine yet. Their rage was still brewing, their defiance unbroken. A widow's strength. I rose from my chair, my knees trembling, but my voice steady. All these years, I said, looking each of them in the eye, I stayed silent. I thought endurance was love. I thought sacrifice was enough. But today, I will not be erased. Richard saw me, and now the law sees me. You wanted me gone. Instead, you'll have to learn to live with the truth. You were not his legacy. I was the ragged man, now revealed as more than he seemed, nodded slightly, a silent affirmation. Mini cliffhanger. Gregory's eyes narrowed into slits. Don't think this is over, Eleanor. Paper may give you the estate, but it won't give you peace. We'll find another way to take what's ours. His words sent a chill down my spine, because I knew him well enough to understand. Threats from Gregory were not idle. If you were me, standing there with justice in your hands but enemies still circling, what would you do next? Hold your ground? Or prepare for the storm that was sure to come? Because the storm was coming, and I was ready. The storm breaks. Gregory's threat lingered in the room, thick and poisonous. Estelle sat rigid, her pearls rattling softly as she clutched them, eyes darting between me and the documents. Marianne muttered under her breath, shaking her head as if refusing to accept the reality before her. For decades, they had written the script of my life. Dutiful wife, invisible caregiver, the woman in the shadows. But that script had just been ripped from their hands, and for the first time in years, I was holding the pen. The final push. The ragged man, Mr. Carter, as he finally introduced himself, stood taller now, his presence commanding despite the frayed coat. Richard anticipated this reaction, he said firmly. That's why he left everything airtight. There is no legal avenue for you to contest. The estate, the businesses, the properties, all are Eleanor's. Effective immediately. Gregory slammed his palm on the table. Over my dead body. Mr. Carter's eyes didn't flinch. Over your brother's dead body, actually. His wishes are final. Unless you intend to challenge his memory in front of a court and drag the family name through the mud. The words landed like a hammer. Even Estelle flinched at the thought of public disgrace. But Gregory wasn't done. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. You think a piece of paper makes you one of us? You'll never be a Whitmore. Never. For years, that line had silenced me, but not anymore. Eleanor's stand. I rose to my feet, pushing my chair back with deliberate force. My voice came out calm, even steady, but every word was edged with steel. I don't need to be a Whitmore by your definition. Because while you were too busy flaunting the family name, I was the one keeping it alive. I cooked your meals. I cared for your parents. I kept your brother breathing when he was slipping away. I gave 37 years of my life. And now Richard has given me what you never could, recognition. I let my eyes linger on each of them, one by one. This manor is mine. The businesses are mine. And you're trespassing. The room went still. Marianne's lips parted in shock. Estelle gasped audibly, and Gregory's face drained of color. The public exposure. The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. I suggest we move forward formally. Eleanor is the sole inheritor. Effective immediately, all titles and deeds are to be transferred in her name. Gregory barked a bitter laugh. You can't just... But before he could finish, Carter opened another folder he'd kept hidden until now. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and email transcripts. Richard was aware of your activities, Gregory, Mr. Carter said coolly. The siphoning of business funds. The offshore accounts. He knew, and he made sure those records were secured. If you push this, I will have no choice but to bring them to the authorities. Gregory's smugness collapsed. For once his mouth hung open, words failing him. Marianne's eyes darted nervously while Estelle's face went pale as parchment. The tables had turned so completely, I almost pitied them. Almost. The cinematic showdown. Gregory lunged toward me then, his voice ragged with fury. You witch! You stole him from us while he lived, and now you steal him from us in death. Before anyone could stop him, I held up my hand, firm and unwavering. No, Gregory. I gave him back to you again and again. When he was sick, I kept him alive so you could have more time. When he longed for family, I begged you to visit. But you chose greed. You chose absence. Don't mistake your guilt for my theft. The words sliced deeper than any blade. His body stiffened, his fury trembling into silence. I leaned closer, my voice low, deliberate. This house, this company, this legacy, they are mine. Not because I demanded them, but because Richard knew who truly carried the weight. If you set one foot on my property without invitation, I will treat you as I would any trespasser. The final blow. You wanted me gone, but I am the one who will decide when you leave. Justice, sealed. The lawyer stamped the documents with an official seal. It's done, he said. Mrs. Whitmore, Eleanor Whitmore, is the sole heir, effective now. The sound of the stamp echoed like thunder, final and irreversible. Estelle collapsed back in her chair, shaking her head. Marianne covered her face with her hands, muttering something inaudible. Gregory simply stared at me, his eyes hollow, the fight drained out of him. And me? I stood straighter than I had in years. For once, I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. The release. When the meeting finally adjourned, I walked out of that courthouse with the rain still pouring, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt cleansing, every drop washing away decades of silence, humiliation, erasure. Mr. Carter walked beside me. He no longer looked ragged. In fact, I realized with a faint smile, he never had. His disguise had been deliberate, a way to test the family, to see their true colors, and they had shown them in all their ugliness. "Richard trusted you," I said quietly. Mr. Carter nodded, and he trusted you most of all. My job was only to protect his wishes. The rest you did on your own. His words struck deep, because he was right. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth, and I had won back my life. Mini cliffhanger. But as I reached the steps of the courthouse, I glanced back through the rain-spattered glass. Estelle, Gregory, and Marianne stood huddled, their faces twisted with rage and defeat. And I knew this wasn't the last I'd see of them. Families like the Whitmores didn't surrender easily. Still, I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I held every card. If you were me, walking away with justice finally in your hands, would you celebrate? Or would you brace yourself for the battles yet to come? Because I was ready for both. The quiet after the storm. The rain had stopped by the time I reached my car. The world smelled of earth and wet leaves, like a field after harvest. For the first time in years, I inhaled deeply without feeling the weight of someone else's expectations pressing on my chest. Justice had been spoken aloud in that room. And though I knew the Whitmores would never forgive me, forgiveness was no longer my burden to carry. A home reclaimed. A week later, I walked the halls of Whitmore Manor, my manor now. The grand chandeliers sparkled above me, the polished wood floors gleamed, but for me the beauty wasn't in the grandeur. It was in the silence. For decades, this house had echoed with whispers of dismissal. She doesn't belong here. She'll never be one of us. But now, for the first time, it echoed with nothing but my own footsteps. I paused at Richard's study, a room that had been closed since his passing. The smell of his old leather chair lingered, his books neatly lined on the shelves. On the desk, tucked into a drawer, I found a small photograph of the two of us from our early years. My hair dark, his arm draped across my shoulders, both of us smiling like the future was wide open. Tears welled in my eyes. "I kept my promise, Richard," I whispered. "They didn't take what we built. They'll never take me again." Consequences. The Whitmores didn't vanish overnight. Estelle retreated to her townhouse in the city, her health declining as the stress of defeat settled into her bones. Marianne tried to rally, threatening court appeals, but without evidence, her bluster faded. Gregory disappeared for a while, rumors of investigations into his offshore accounts swirling quietly in the business pages. I didn't rejoice in their downfall, but I also didn't grieve it. They had chosen their path. Their greed had sown their ruin. And me? I chose peace. A widow's choice. I began making changes. The grand dining hall, once a place of whispered judgments, became a gathering spot for the community. I hosted dinners for neighbors, invited single mothers and widows to share meals at my table, and filled the space with laughter that had been absent for too long. One afternoon, a woman approached me after such a dinner. She was in her late 50s, her eyes tired but kind. "I've lived next to this house for 20 years, she said softly, "and I've never once been invited in. Until now. Thank you." Her words struck me deeper than she could know, because isn't that what legacy should be? Not gates and greed, but generosity. Lessons learned. When I look back, I sometimes wonder, why did I endure their cruelty for so long? Why did I let their words define my worth? The answer, I think, is simple. I thought love meant silence. I thought devotion meant invisibility. But Richard, in his final act, gave me the reminder it's needed. Love is not erasure. Love is recognition. If you're listening now, perhaps you've felt invisible in your own family. Perhaps you've given everything, only to be told you don't belong. Let me tell you, Your worth is not measured by their recognition. It is measured by the love you've poured, the lives you've touched, the sacrifices you've made. And sometimes, when the world finally notices, it may be too late for them to apologize. But it's never too late for you to stand. Eleanor's boundaries. I did not cut the Whitmores out entirely. That would have been easy revenge. Instead, I set boundaries. Visits required my permission. Conversations required respect. The estate, once their weapon, became my shield. When Gregory eventually tried to show his face, demanding explanations, I met him at the front steps with a firm voice. This house is not a stage for your anger. If you come here again, it will be by invitation and with respect. Otherwise, the law will greet you instead of me. He stared at me, stunned, before turning away. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Recognition that I was no longer his victim. The legacy redefined years later. People would remember that stormy day in the courthouse not for the drama, but for the lesson. The woman who was supposed to fade quietly into the background instead rose, not with violence, but with dignity, law, and truth. That is the legacy I choose to carry. Not the Whitmore name, not the wealth, not the property. The legacy is the knowledge that silence is not survival. It is surrender, and I will never surrender again. Closing reflections. Let me ask you as you sit with me in this quiet moment, if you were erased in your own family story, how would you fight back? Would you let them write you out? Or would you find a way to hold the pen again? Have you ever witnessed injustice at a table where you were told to stay quiet? If so, know this: you are not alone. Here, in this community, each story is a reminder that no one should endure in silence. We rise together, we speak together, and sometimes, through the power of truth, we win together. The moral respect isn't given by blood. It's earned through love, through kindness, through loyalty. The Whitmores had blood, but I had love. And in the end, love proved the stronger legacy. So to anyone listening, guard your worth, set your boundaries, and never let those who dismiss you decide your value. Community call. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own battles, share it in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you've endured, what you've overcome. Because here in this community, no one carries injustice alone. And don't forget, subscribe to Quiet Revenge Tales and ring the bell. There are more stories waiting for you. Stories of sacrifice, betrayal, and the quiet revenges that change everything. Until next time, remember, you hold the pen to your own story. Don't let anyone else write you out of it.